Good morning, TGIF. It is 10:58 Friday morning, May 29th. Hope everyone's doing good. Hope everyone has some fun plans for this weekend. Going to see some metal bands tonight at Hey Sailor, which is such a great spot. I love this place. It's right in Searsport. They have so many great shows. It's wild how they have lots of metal bands play there. They have all kinds of music there, but they have lots of metal bands, and it's quite a scene. It's wild that those shows get the biggest turnouts. Like it's wild, but they have some really great shows coming up. I try to go there when I can, whenever I'm free or have the night off or whatever. It's such a great spot, and I've had a lot of great experiences going there. On the other side of things too, I've also had a lot of really awesome experiences playing gigs there. I love playing there, and I've played a lot of last over the last 2 years. I've played a lot of like quantum gigs there. It's been really fortunate. So I'm excited. There's a band based in Belfast, a really great local death metal band called Burial Curse, and they're playing tonight, and they're really good. They've really kind of come into their own kind of thing. And I haven't seen them play in actually quite a while, so kind of excited to see them. They recently put out a record, their first album or EP, I believe. But yeah, very cool. It's a trio, and I have a few gigs at Hey Sailor this summer. Uh, the next Quantum show we have there, I think, is in July. I'm gonna be playing there with Travis Lloyd again, which I'm super excited. It's going to be a little bit of a different night because we played there together in December last year, and it was a really fun show. He Travis is such an incredibly talented guy. He has this electronic kind of side project. He's been in Midcoast and in the area for a very long time, but incredible, one of my favorite singer songwriters. Such a talented guy, super cool guy. So he has this electronic group, and we played together at Hey Sailor in December, and it was a really fantastic show. He played a set, and then we opened up for him as Quantum, and it was a night of all like original electronic music. But it was really fun, and it was a really gotten I've gotten a chance to play there a lot. Been really fortunate, and I think it was one of the best, if not the best, like shows or show that we've played there. And the whole experience in the night. Um, but this time, originally we booked it as kind of the same thing. Basically, I was going to do a quantum set, and then Travis was going to come and do his electronic set too. And it's still going to be like that. Only it in some ways, but it's actually going to be quite a bit different because a couple months ago, a couple months ago, I should say, or maybe a little bit longer now. But after I talked to Travis about putting together this show this summer, I think it was maybe a few weeks later, he asked me if I'd be interested in playing drums in this band that he has with Nate Rowley, who is an old friend of mine, and it's been really great just kind of reconnecting with him. He used to be in this really amazing. Nate Rowley used to be in this amazing local band over 10 years ago called the Class Machine, a really great rock band, one of the best bands in the area. And they unfortunately had broken up, but Travis and him have been friends for years and years, and they've had this band. They've had a few different rotating people come through the band. They haven't really played out in a while, and with this new project that they have. And so Travis asked me if I'd be interested in playing drums for them. So I was like, yeah, I do what I can. And so I started playing with them, and their music is really interesting. There's a lot of interesting weird time signatures. It's definitely indie rock. It's definitely has some electronic stuff. It's similar to his solo stuff, the electronic material, but then it's also quite a bit different. And so what he decided to do was, for this show in at Hey Sailor, I'm going to be pulling double duty, as the kids say, where I'm going to play quantum set, by myself, but then I'm going to also play drums with him. So that's going to be an interesting night. Similar, but yet very different from, I think, the first show we played. So really excited about that. Other quantum shows that are coming up in the very very near future. We have a quantum show this coming Sunday at 2 o'clock, 2 to 4. It's at this very cool venue. It's first time, my first time playing there. It's at the Sea Hag, and it's in Rockport. It's a like a hard cider brewery, and it's right in Rockport. It's pretty close to here. It's a like 15-20 minute drive from my house, and I'm going to be playing there 2 to 4. So yeah, excited about that. We have a few other shows there after this one booked, so this will be the first of a few gigs. So really excited about that. If you're in the area, come on by. It's going to be probably, I don't really know totally what to expect, but I think it's going to be a little bit more on the laid back, kind of chilled kind of vibe of things, because it's a Sunday afternoon, and but we'll see how things go. So I've been reworking on or revisiting a lot of my more mellow, jazzy, or kind of ambient tracks, which I haven't played in a while, because a lot of the gigs that we've been playing or had been playing, and it's been a pretty good year with Quantum. I had some really fun gigs. We did, we played at Hey Sailor a couple times, and then we did a show at American Legion Hall, and then we did another really fun show at Opera House Video, and then we did another show at Lucia Spirits, which was really fun with a bunch of bands. So, but most of the time, we're playing with other bands, other groups, so we tend to like play maybe a little bit more on the heavier side of things, with the heavier material, if you want to call it that, more experimental stuff or whatever. But so this will be a 2 hour show, and I haven't played like a full 2 hour show in quite a while, but I'm looking forward to it. So, and I also just recently bought a new PA head, which I'm pretty excited about. I had some problems with what I have currently, which is like an amp setup, and the thing with the problem that I've had with that is it's really good and it works, but it's pretty verschnickety, because the wires, there's a back area where you plug in. Not that anybody cares me talking about this now, but there's a back section to the amp of where the wires kind of pop out very easily. There's a red and white kind of feed that you have with the cords. It's kind of similar to red and white, or a male female cord that you would plug into speakers for, a stereo. It's pretty similar. But the thing that happens with it is it pops out a lot of the times, and it gets loosened, and it's very I don't know, the way when you set it up, it's kind of precarious, because the cords have to like hang, so, and then you got to plug in cords into it, and then that kind of pulls it down, so that causes it sometimes to pop out, and it's kind of a pain in the ass, because sometimes you have to sit there and kind of like, kind of mess with it, get the cord in, or get the wire, make sure the wire is plugged in, and it's kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. So I was using, and I usually use that for practice. I've had it for a long time, and it works really well, but I've had it mainly just here at my house for when I'm using for practice. And I have the PA with the amp. And, whenever I have rehearsals here at my house with other bands, I use that one. So we have a house system for vocals and stuff. And I plug all my quantum stuff into it. And I have used it for gigs, but Mike Whitehead, who was in the band, and he's no longer in the band as of a couple of months now, he we would usually use his powered PA head, which was really great and easy, super efficient because you could just it's all in one piece. You don't have to worry about cords popping out and all that stuff. So typically, when we would play quantum gigs where we would have to run our own sound, we I would always use that, and it was pretty easy set up and pretty reliable. Whether we had to play inside gigs, and then what tends to happen during the summer is there's more gigs that are outside for obvious reasons, and so it was pretty dependable for any of those venues. So, but he's not in the band anymore, and so I wanted to try to figure out what I could do since I don't have that access to it. I mean, I could like ask him and borrow it, and I did ask him already to borrow it earlier, like a couple of weeks ago, and he has a bunch of other things going on right now, and I couldn't use it. But then I was like, you know what? I should probably just try to buy one because that's kind of ridiculous that I'm gonna have to ask to borrow that each time I might have a gig where I have to run my own sound. And he's about an hour away, and I'm like, this is kind of ridiculous. So I decided to shop around, and I got this, and it took me a while. It was harder than I thought, but I spent like 2 weeks shopping around for it, and I scored on a really nice PA head. So I went up yesterday to Brewer, and I picked it up, and I got a really good deal on it. And so far, so good. Knock on wood. Picked it up, and I got it home, and I worked on it, set it up last night, and worked with it for a while, and I'm pretty happy with it so far. And it's really light, it's compact, it's small, it has a lot of power to it, so I'm going to be using that from now on. So yeah, kind of excited. But we have the show on Sunday at CHAG, 2 o'clock in Rockport, and then the other show, which is another reason that I wanted to definitely figure the sound system problem out. Next, a week from this Sunday is the big Pride Festival in Rockland, Maine, and I'm going to be playing there as well with Quantum, and we're going to be playing an earlier set on Sunday, like at noon, and it's going to be on Main Street. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm also going to be donating my PA system to the folks at the festival for the rest of the day. And so I needed to figure out a better situation for my setup. So that will be not this a week from this coming Sunday. So this week is the CHAG, and then next Sunday will be at the Pride Festival. And the reason I'm going to be doing that, kind of putting it in my, try to help out, donate to the fine folks at the Pride Festival. It's a pretty big event. We played there last year, and it was on a Sunday. It was the same time last year. It was actually really fun. Play like an hour and a half, but I have a gig right after, or fairly after, but I have a gig in Rockland after the Pride Festival. We're going to be playing like an hour set, I guess. And then I got to scoot over to Primo. I have a gig over there from 2 to 4. And then after that gig, I'm going to come by to the kind of the Pride Festival will still be going on, but I'm going to come back and then pick up the PA after that. So it'll be a fun day. So yeah. And I've been doing these music shows. I did, I did a really big show on the amazing concert that I just went to. I went to go see Napalm Death and Primitive Man and Come to Grief. I saw them on Sunday at Gino's, and man, what a killer show. Really, 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 really great show. And before that, in my kind of anticipation and my excitement for the show, I did a show on Napalm Death, which was the headlining band on Sunday. One of my favorite one of my favorite bands in general, and also one of my favorite extreme music bands. And so I I have listened to Napalm Death for for since I was a kid. I mean, probably since I was like 13. It's crazy. So today I'm going to be doing a show on my favorite Napalm Death album, and that is Fear, Emptiness, and Despair, which is my favorite record of theirs. They have so many albums, it's insane. It's crazy how long they've been around, and out of bands that tour and just kind of really work their asses off, I don't think any band works any harder than Napalm. They might be the hardest working band that I know of as far as their touring schedule is completely insane. And they have literally been to every part of the globe probably 4 times. And they have this like level of integrity. They're able to like maintain their identity. I you know I kind of always naturally gravitate towards bands and music that where the bands and I just find it really inspiring. But I always naturally kind of gravitate towards music and bands that where the artists kind of really take some chances and more or less kind of reinvent themselves. They're not like content with just being labeled and kind of put in this box and kind of putting out the same record all the time. I've referred to this, well, I call it kind of a syndrome. There's two things that I always like refer to as like, and I don't think I've like I don't think I invented these terms, but maybe I did, but I call it grandpa syndrome, and then the ACDC syndrome, and I've talked about those two things a lot. And the first one, grandpa syndrome, is a little bit more obvious. I mean, I'm an old man, but grandpa syndrome is mostly related to people that it's kind of related a little bit to like the whole gatekeeping thing where people are like really want to hold on to something and they are they want to like die on that bridge, and but defending more so defending something that's a little bit like ridiculous and that we're kind of come across as being kind of a snob or an elitist kind of person. But usually the grandpa syndrome for me is essentially when you have people who will say, and it happens all the time, where they say, well, there's no new records, no new bands that are good now in 2026 or in the last 10 years. There's no good bands, there's no good albums that exist anymore, and I especially hear it a lot when it comes to movies, where people shit on new movies all the time and say, oh, they don't make movies like they used to, and all the movies are shit. This is why I don't go to the theater. Blah blah blah. I see that kind of thing or that mindset most of the time. I do see it in music, but I honestly think I see it more in the movie world, and I'm kind of like it kind of drives me crazy when I hear that. I get it. I get it. There have been times where I get, I mean, it's a normal thing. I get frustrated, or there's like a time where I'm like finding things that just are not, really exciting, or like, things that make you fired up, inspire you. Of course, and that's nothing new. And then it has this ebb and flow. And then you discover something that you're like, oh, okay, this is I'm into this. And it always has this ebb and flow. And that's not anything different. That's always been part of our kind of just our world. And again, it's also highly subjective. What you find and what you check out, what you gravitate towards, what doesn't really turn you on and what does turn you on, all those things. But I'm always a big proponent of that there are some, the last couple of years, this year has turned out to be a really great year for films. And the last couple of years, I think there's been some tremendous films that have come out. And I think the same thing with music. There's been so many newer groups, newer bands, newer albums that I've discovered that I've just been, super excited about, super blown away, and inspired, definitely. That being said, for the most part, I traditionally listen to older music. the 70s. The 70s is my primetime decade. That's my favorite decade of all time for music and especially for film. I do the same thing. I probably do it, well, I don't know. It's about the same. I'd say it's about the same. But I typically watch a lot of older films most of the time. That's kind of where 70s and 80s. I do watch films that are older than, that from the 60s and even before that. But I typically, my head is in the 70s and 80s when it comes to movies, especially, and especially with music. So I have my well of, or my source, that well that I always go back to find inspiration. For me, just personally as a fan of film and music and art. And it's also, that those things are a huge influence for me when it comes to for quantum. But at the same time, I'm always trying to keep my finger on the pulse of new things that are coming out, because I'm always, it's kind of staggering and kind of overwhelming, the sheer amount of things that are coming out all the time. And I rather have it be a sense of where it's kind of overwhelming with the amount of cool things coming out, than opposed to being than being on the other side of the fence, and being like, wow, geez, there's nothing really happening. But I've defended a lot of newer things that have come out, and that whole kind of grandpa syndrome, somebody bitching on, sitting on their porch kind of thing, and it is a little bit of a gatekeeping thing. Drives me crazy. But, and I have defended, I've been in a lot of situations where I have defended newer artists, newer things, newer directors, newer films, and numerous times. Um, and then the other thing that I mentioned is kind of the ACDC syndrome. And that is something of where basically we're a band. This is more, I guess, pertains more to music, where a band has a, a band can find a particular style or a niche, and then they do it, they stick to that. They stick to that formula as a they use that as a blueprint, and then they essentially put out every record they put out is essentially the same thing. They don't really veer off too much. They don't really take a whole lot of risks. They definitely don't reinvent themselves. They never throw the audience like big giant curveballs, and you're never like, in that situation when that particular band puts out a record where you're like, wow, I wonder what this is going to be like. It's never the case. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And two of the bands that I use for examples that do that, that have essentially released the same album for, I don't know, 30, 40 years. The biggest one, and it's named after this ACDC syndrome idea that I've come up with, or concept, is ACDC themselves. Like they've been around for decades, and I love classic old school ACDC. I think they're a classic band, and what they do for their particular style is fantastic. But you know, I think it's pretty safe to say they've released the same album, literally the same album, for 40 years, 50 years. And they've made a lot of, they've become very successful for that. And that's not bad. That's good, I think. I think when a band, the hardest thing for a band to do is to find their own sound, their own style. And when that's achieved, when you like can hear 2 seconds of a certain band or sound, and then you know who it is, that's magic, and that's what every artist tries to strive for. Within that, there's so many other areas. But they're, I think you could definitely say they're a one trick pony. They've done something. They've figured a certain particular sound, a certain kind of niche, an audience to kind of market their whole thing to. They have a certain kind of template that they use, and they do that template really, really well. And they just stay in that box. And they've been, they're one of the most popular bands in the world because of that. Another band that I think does that to a T pretty much is Cannibal Corpse. Cannibal Corpse is one of my favorite death metal bands. I love them to death. But they have pretty much they've I think it's safe to say that they've released the same album for 50 years. Not 50 years, but 30 years, 25 years. With little ebbs and flows, little changes here and there, but I think it's safe to say they are definitely in that league of where I would classify them as they definitely use they're part of the ACDC syndrome, and that's not bad. I mean, I love I love Cannibal Corpse, and I got to see them play last year, and they were amazing. And I almost think that where they are now with their sound and as tight as they are as a band, I almost feel like they sound better now than they ever have. But they have pretty much released the same record for year after year. With Napalm Death, that is not the case, I don't think, at all. So what I was saying was I love that sound of where a band has a formulaic sound. They've established themselves, like ACDC, Cannibal Corpse, and there's numerous other bands that do that. But I naturally kind of gravitate a little bit more towards bands and artists and film directors, for that matter, where, but in this case, it's more music related, where the artist is kind of like a chameleon and they kind of reinvent themselves. My favorite artist of all time is David Bowie, and he's like the epitome of that, because every record that he put out, you just don't know you don't know what you're gonna get. It's always new, it's always fresh, everything is different, literally kind of reinventing himself with each record. And I love that. I love that you just, throughout the years, discovering and listening to David Bowie, there's so many different elements. There's so many, he took on so many different personas, was influenced by so many different kinds of music, so many different kinds of art, so many different forms of expression. I naturally gravitate more to artists that do that, because I just feel like that is just, I mean, again, it's just subjective. It's it's more exciting. Another band that I definitely think is cut from the same cloth or cut from the same tree is they're pretty much my favorite indie, if you want to call them, but indie rock band, a band called the Liars, based in New York for a very long time, and they've been in L.A. They've actually been around for years and years, and they're, when it comes to like noisy, kind of nihilistic. They definitely have a little bit of that vibe, but kind of very art house kind of sound, very experimental. But indie rock band, The Liars is probably my favorite band, and they do the same thing. Like, each record is so different that they've put out. They've totally reinvented themselves. They've gone through a lot of numerous lineup changes. So has David Bowie, but they literally reinvent themselves, and you just don't know what you're going to get when you hear a new record of theirs. They're always pushing the boundaries. They never put out the same record, and I just love that. And I feel like when it comes to extreme music and heavy music, Napalm Death does that same thing. Like, totally taking chances, totally taking risks, incorporating lots of different influences. They are influenced by lots of different things, and at the same time they definitely have a certain style. You can identify their sound really quickly, at least I can. But if you listen through their records right now, since the concert of seeing them, I've been revisiting their discography. I've been going through a lot of their records and listening to them again. It's been super fun. I mean, it's like something like 15 or 16 albums. Some of them I haven't actually listened to in a while, so I've been kind of going on this little adventure and checking them out again, and it's been super fun. But that's the thing that just, to me, is so glaringly obvious, is that each record that I've been listening to again, and I own a lot of their albums on CD, each record I've been listening to, it's been like, holy shit, they I feel like Napalm throws so many surprises in their music. You know, they kind of get labeled as a grindcore band, and of course that is a big part of their sound. But I feel like to just say that, I do feel that it's kind of it's a disservice. I don't think that's accurate because when I listen to their records, there's a level of where I don't know where it's going to go. I'm always surprised, and each record sounds different. The writing is very different. They experiment with all kinds of different styles of music, and I think that they are. You know, I think that's one of the reasons they've been around for so long is that they're not afraid to really change things up and surprise you. So today's show is on, and again, there's so many albums that they have, so many records that they put out. But I have to say, like when I first got into Napalm Death, the first album I heard when I was a little kid was Harmony Corruption. That was the first album, and they were kind of going through. It was right around the time when the Tampa, Florida death metal scene was exploding. Earache Records was also happening. You had Carcass. You had all these great bands coming out of England at the time, and Napalm Death. And the death metal scene was just kind of coming out of its shell, and it was right at that precipice where it exploded and it became a major thing in extreme music. Like, it was the biggest thing when it came out with all the bands in Florida that came out. You know the it was like kind of like the perfect storm for death metal and extreme music. And when Harmony Corruption came out, that was when I got exposed to all of those bands like Obituary, Morbid Angel, Deicide. It was right at that same time when I heard Harmony Corruption from Napalm Death, and that was it. And they were kind of going through like I death metal is obviously a big part of Napalm sound, but I definitely think Harmony Corruption, because of the time period and all the bands that were coming out and the sound, they were really obviously, I think as far as death metal influences, like I think that's the most death metal sounding record that they did. They moved away from it to a degree. They always have, it's always a part of their music, but they definitely moved and changed their sound pretty much super dramatically. Like the album I'm going to be talking about today, which is my favorite album of theirs, which is called Fear, Emptiness, and Despair, which is my all-time favorite Napalm Death album. It's wild. If you listen to Harmony Corruption or even Scum, and then you listen to Fear, Emptiness, and Despair, they literally sound like two different bands. Like, it's like, wow, that's the same band. Again, Napalm has a particular style that's really volcanic. If that's even a word. But to me, it's always Napalm has always sounded like this fucking bomb going off. Like grenades going off or a volcano going off or a planet exploding. Just really next level, and just with this next level intensity. And they have this very distinct sound, but other than that, and a certain style, but other than that, when you listen to those two records, holy shit, it sounds like two different bands. But yet, there's a thread, there's a thing that you can kind of identify it, and it's something else. It really is. But Harmony Corruption was the first record that I ever heard of Napalm. I was hooked right away. I remember buying that on cassette. And after that album, as a kid, I was, I don't know, maybe 13, 12 or 13. It's crazy. That was it for me. That was it. That was it. And so after that album came out, I just became obsessed, you know, with Napalm. Fear, Emptiness, and Despair was a big kind of transition for Napalm as far as their sound goes, and it technically was kind of their first major label release, which is kind of insane. Doing some research on this record, looking up some info, I was like, huh, okay. There were certain things I forgot about and didn't realize. Of course, Napalm started out and was on the Earache Records label for a long time. But during this time, and Fear, Emptiness, and Despair came out in '94, Earache started this partnership with Columbia Records, which was Columbia Records, probably long dead now, but was a major U.S. label at the time, and they started a partnership with Columbia Records, which was wild. And so this album, Fear, Emptiness, Despair, was released on this record. I remember when I first heard this album, it just blew me away. It really did, because I was. It was an interesting time because I had just, started to get a little bit more into music. When I was a kid, when I was, well, probably right around the time when I first heard Napalm Death, Harmony Corruption, I was taking guitar lessons for a brief time. I played guitar for a couple of years. I took lessons, but my problem, and again, I was super young, but I took guitar lessons for a little bit, but I never really practiced, and then did that for a couple of years, and then I got into drum set, and it wasn't until like I graduated high school in '94, because I'm a very old man, and that's when this album came out. But it wasn't until high school, well, I got into playing drums, and probably the last 2 years of high school. Yeah, it was like the last 2 years of high school. I started taking private lessons, and I had this really great teacher for a couple of years, David Christopher, and so he was kind of the first guy, even though it was kind of later on until it actually happened. But he was kind of the first guy that got me at least aware of other kinds of music, as far as jazz music, fusion music, and things like that. And it was kind of like my first little bit of exposure to progressive music, even like with jazz music and uh, even world music and fusion. But Fear, Emptiness, Despair, I think, is one of their most. I think it might be their most experimental record, because when you listen to this album, it's so it's such a cool combination of. There's a lot of odd meters in it, a lot of odd meter music, which you hear a lot in progressive rock and fusion music. I mean, when I talk about like prog rock or like fusion music, like there's a lot of the bands that like come to mind. Like I really love fusion music a lot, and I really try to work on some of that stuff, because obviously it's very hard to play, because traditionally most music here, that in the states, most American music, pop music especially, is in 4/4 time. With fusion music, it is incorporating odd meters. Odd meters that you don't necessarily that you are not necessarily going to listen to maybe dance to, per se. Where typically everything in American music, for the most part, pop music, things that you hear on the radio, is in 4/4 time. Fusion music takes like elements of where odd meters, where things will be, a lot of times they'll be, odd meters, like things will be in seven, 5 or 9, and then all different kinds of combinations of that. And fusion music is also a real interesting style, because it incorporates lots of different kinds of music. Fusion, incorporates music, well, probably the biggest influence would be American jazz. The greats, John Col, an influence from John Coltrane, obviously Miles Davis, Sonny Rollins. I mean, the list is endless. It takes a big influence from that, but then it also takes an influence from rock music at the same time. And then also world music, African music. It could be, you know, Indian music. I mean, Latin music, all kinds of things. So it has an influence from Latin music as well, and it tends to be a lot more on the kind of experimental side, if you will. But there's a lot of odd meter things, and some of those bands, I love that music. Fusion is one of my favorite styles of music, and probably, I mean, there's so many great bands in the '70s, but like, and this is definitely related to, and I think that's why one of the reasons, because I had just kind of discovered this music and started to really dig it when Fear, Emptiness, and Despair had come out by Napalm. So it was kind of an interesting time period. And it was funny, like when I first heard jazz as a kid, I I knew it was good. It was really weird. Like I knew it was really good music. I knew it was important music, but for me, I could not get into jazz for the longest time. It was really weird. I had a really good teacher, a teacher later on after my time with David Christopher, and he would make. I had a teacher for a couple of years who he was a really great player, and he would make me mixtapes. Yes, mixtapes on cassette, and they would be, you know, records by John Coltrane, Miles Davis, John Schofield. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Pat Metheny, and I would listen to these cassettes over and over again. But for some reason, I could not get into them, even though I knew this music was really important and I should really dig this stuff. I couldn't get into it. It was really, really weird, and this went on for a while, a couple of years, a few years. And the reason was at the time was I felt like everything to me sounded so old. Like I felt like the drums sounded really old. The music seemed dated to me, and and I was a kid. I was like 18, 19, and I just felt like all the drums, the sound of the piano, the guitar, everything sounded old to me. I don't know why. And then fast forward of like a few years of that, maybe 2 or 3 years of where I was like trying to like check out, listening to a lot of, but it never got to me. Like it never connected. And then one day after doing that, I put in Miles Davis, "Kind of Blue," which is I think still to this day the biggest selling jazz album. But one day I put that on, and it just everything clicked, and I was just like, "Whoa, this is some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard." And one day it was literally like after kind of struggling with it for a while, it was literally like somebody walked into the room and turned a light on, and it just made sense. Like, or not even I wouldn't even say it made sense, but it totally resonated with me, and I was like, "Man, this is incredible music," and it changed my life forever. To where I was like, when I was at school at Berkeley, I often I would often hear people call it, you get bitten by the jazz bug, where if you get into a group or an album, then you become totally obsessed, and that's kind of what happened, and that happens with all kinds of music, I think. But that's what happened. I became totally obsessed with jazz, started buying tons of albums, checking out, and I was fortunate enough when I was at school to see so much great jazz. Got to see Antonio Sanchez at the same time. I got to see him play all the time, and that was it. And now it's like evolved to where like jazz, and this is just from a listening perspective, but jazz is like one of my favorite styles of music to listen to. And but it took me a while. It took me a while to kind of like get into it, and now I just absolutely love it. It's funny. But the first time I ever heard fusion music, though, I loved it right away and I think that was because of the rock element. Like I remember probably the first fusion album I ever heard was my Mahavishnu Orchestra, Birds of Fire. And the first time I heard that album, I was just like, "Holy shit! This is like the most fucking intense thing I've ever heard." There was something about, and I think it's because of the rock element that made me interested. And so when it comes to fusion music, probably my favorite group of all time is Tony Williams' Lifetime. Um, Emergency, the first record that they put out, that's probably my favorite fusion album. I really love Dennis Chambers, the Blue Matter group with John Schofield, Gary Granger, and the legendary Dennis Chambers. That's probably my one of my all-time favorite fusion groups. Um, Mahavishnu Orchestra, amazing. What hasn't been said about those guys? I mean, just amazing, amazing. So many great fusion groups. And when I was starting to get into that music, just when I was getting into that stuff, like really starting to dig it, that's when I heard. I was already again a Napalm Death fan for a very long time, but it was kind of like perfect timing because I felt like, wow, they're kind of doing like this proggy fusion kind of thing on this record. Really interesting, and it was so different. And there's a lot of because Fear, Emptiness, Despair, I think, is one of the most. It's probably as far as sonically, texturally, and definitely rhythmically, they push the boundaries. Probably, it's probably the biggest example of them pushing the boundaries the furthest is that record. Really interesting odd meter stuff. I've seen interviews with Napalm where they were saying how they were really influenced by bands at the time. Bands like Helmet, which is at that time Helmet was one of my. I still love Helmet. I mean, a really great progressive kind of post rock metal band, hardcore band, post rock. Lots of odd meters, lots of interesting and weird kind of guitar chords and rhythmic ideas. And other bands that I was really into as a kid were bands like, and I still love them, Sonic Youth and the Pixies. Really great. And I've always been a huge fan of Sonic Youth. I've always loved that kind of dissonance that Thurston Moore would kind of create with his guitar chords, that weird tension, just weird tunings. Heavy music, but like heavy in a different way. Really experimental, kind of dark and really melancholy. And I remember reading interviews with members of Napalm, Shane Embury, of course, mostly, where they were saying when they recorded this album, they were listening to a lot of that kind of music. They were really kind of being influenced by a lot of indie rock stuff. And when I hear Fear, Emptiness, and Despair, I hear a lot of influence from Sonic Youth in it. Like, because there's a lot of weird. I mean, the rhythmic stuff is really wild and really seismic and really. I think it grooves. The album grooves so hard. It's probably their funkiest album, if you want to call it funky. But there's so many cool odd meter, rhythmic kind of ideas on the album. The other thing that's so great is the guitar work, the guitar playing, and there's so many interesting, weird arrangements. There's a lot of weird dissonance, but yet the album is also like incredibly melodic and it's super heavy. It's really, I don't know, the album always sounds like so apocalyptic to me, and just like it just, yeah, like it has this otherworldly kind of chaotic nature to it. Barney's vocals sound just absolutely incredible. The production on the album is absolutely incredible. It's got one of the greatest drum sounds I think they ever got on a record. It's incredible. It's the most like, I think it's the biggest sound that they ever had. And I still think after Fear and Emptiness Despair, they put out a lot of other records, obviously, right up until a couple of years ago, that are very experimental and they've definitely pushed the boundaries in other ways. In many ways. But there's something really special about Fear, Emptiness, and Despair. Like recently, I looked up some concerts of theirs on YouTube, and again, this came out in '94, the record, and I found some live concerts of Napalm when they were touring for this album, and you know that it's kind of rough quality, and it's like bootleg quality, and it's live. It's a live video of like one of their full sets, but it's amazing. Like it's unbelievable. I really feel like, even though I think Napalm still sounds absolutely amazing, I think there is, during that time in '94, '95, I honestly think it was probably the height of their ability as a band. Like Barney's vocals, the music, just the creativity, the energy, unparalleled. I think it was the best phase, or the best period. Napalm's gone through lots of different lineups over the years. Mark Barney Greenway, his vocals again on Fear, Emptiness, Despair are just unparalleled. Just I think for me, he's always been one of my favorite vocalists as well. Just in general, I mean, for death metal and extreme music, but just in general, I've just always thought like his vocals are just amazing. One of my all time favorite vocalists. Jesse Pintado, who passed away a few years back, was also on guitar. He played on a lot of the earlier records with Napalm Death, but he passed away unfortunately. Also, Mitch Harris. Now, for the last, oh man, probably for like the last, well, quite maybe the last 10 years, maybe, Napalm has essentially become a trio. But during this period, they had two guitars in the band, and you really hear that distinct uniqueness in their sound. I mean, lots of interesting, weird melodies, lots of dissonance. Mitch Harris was in the band. He quit a few years back, but he really had such an amazing sound. He's an amazing guitar player, and so the late great Jesse Pintado, amazing, and of course the iconic Shane Embury, amazing, amazing. One of the founding members of the band, and Danny Heria, who played drums on this album, and I think he's been in the band forever. He took over after Mick Harris left the band, and he's been in the band so long, and he's a fantastic drummer. I think this is easily his finest hour as a drummer. His performance on this shit is just like off the chain. It's wild. The other thing that's really cool, like when I getting back to Fear Emptiness Despair specifically, like the rhythmic thing, one of the hardest things, again, when it comes to, you know, playing odd meters, maybe even for when it comes to like the rhythm section of the band, one of the most challenging things when you're playing things in odd meters, like as opposed to like 4/4 time, but if you're trying something in 9 or 7, um, is to kind of make it groove, make it feel good, make it feel like really natural, because that's really hard. A lot of the times those kinds of things can be played well, but they don't really. There isn't that. I love when odd meter stuff is played or presented, but the line is blurred to where it's not maybe super obvious that it's in an odd meter. It still can groove to it. You can still kind of almost dance to it, and it has a funkiness to it. And I think what Napalm does with those kinds of rhythmic ideas, by taking these kind of complex arrangements and making them groove, like like really groove, and it just locks in to the point where I feel like, you know you wouldn't really even recognize it that it's in an odd meter. Like you wouldn't really, I think your common person, your average Joe would not recognize that particular groove or rhythm or that tune is in 7 or a 9. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, when it comes to using odd rhythms and odd meters, that's what you really want. Because you don't want it to stand out. You want it to really flow and groove no matter what that time signature is. But the hard part is taking something that is, not a common rhythm that you hear, rhythmic time signature, and making it feel good. So, but I feel like what they did with this record when it comes to those aspects, it's a masterclass. Like the shit just grooves hard, and that's what you want. That's really really what you want. And so, yeah, even to this day, and it came out in '94, so it's been out for years and years and years, and I still listen to Fear, Emptiness, Despair. I got a really beautiful kind of remastering or a newer edition of Fear, Emptiness, Despair on CD a couple of years ago. Oh, so damn good. So damn good. I had it when it came out on cassette for years. And then when I eventually got it on CD, it was like a whole game changer. And then a few years ago, I think it was 5 years ago, I rebought it on CD and it was a remastered version. And it's just so killer. So killer. And it's interesting too because again, doing a little bit of research on Fear, Emptiness, Despair and finding out some things about it that I didn't know. There's a little interview that I found with Shane Embury, and he was talking about at one point, I think it was in a 2017 interview that he was giving, he felt that this album was their worst album. This was at that time he wasn't happy. Looking back at all of the records that they had done as a band, he felt this one was the most disappointing. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I think Shane Emery's opinion on Fear, Emptiness, Despair has changed probably since then because that was 2017. But he was quoted as saying how he felt that was like their worst album, and he was saying how the reason being was when Earache merged with Columbia, suddenly, you know, Napalm technically was signed to a major American label. And he said that during the whole in this interview, he said that during the whole recording process of the album, they were kind of like at odds with the studio, with the label executives on the direction of the album. They, the record label was trying to make it more accessible. They wanted it to be more, to sound current at the time because this was during the time when kind of the grunge thing was huge, and you had bands like Soundgarden, Jane's Addiction, all of those bands, Stone Temple Pilots, were all like the biggest bands, biggest rock bands. And so Columbia was trying to kind of steer them more in that direction. And he said that, and Shane Embury said that the whole time that they were working on the record and writing the record, they were constantly in conflict with the executives because they were like trying to push them into a certain sound, but yet Napalm was trying to do what they do. Really interesting. And he looked back at the whole experience as being just terrible. And, that says a lot working with a major label. But that being said, just in my opinion, it put out one fucking killer record. So, interesting. But thanks again. Peace.